Hey everyone, I'm Pooja and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. Over here we paint simple things like patterns and florals using watercolors, and I share my process of painting in a step-by-step guided way. In today's video we will be painting some beautiful echinacea, or more commonly known as coneflowers, in different colors. I have listed all the supplies in the description box below, so be sure to check those out. Now let's get started. We are going to paint a slightly different variation of the echinacea. I have this book which has some beautiful pictures of flowers, and I thought, why not paint an echinacea which is in a slightly different shade of color other than the usual purple and violets that we see. This variety that we are painting today is called the double scoop orangeberry echinacea. So it's got some beautiful shades of red, orange and maybe reddish magenta, and I've tried to mix similar shades on my palette using a bit of red, a bit of primary red magenta and a small amount of orange. I have made sure that the paint is not too runny, but it's moist enough to be able to play around. I'm using a small size round brush in size 2, and I started with the center first. I'm making these small brush strokes to resemble the center petals, which are tightly closed and also smaller in size. So using my brush, I'm just making these tiny strokes or dots and building a rough circle or a rough sphere shape, which is going to be the center of our flower. So that's how it looks. I've also added a bit of darker shade around the edge, and then I'm switching to my size 6 round brush to paint the petals. I'm going to use the same paint that I've mixed earlier to paint the center, and I'm going to make slightly longer brush strokes and paint the petals of the flower that are in the downward direction. So I'm making sure that the petals are not too perfect, and I'm not just painting every petal of the same size and color. In between, I'm also loading some water on the tip of my brush and making sure that some of the petals are dark and some of the petals are light in color. So I'm just going about the lower half of the center and painting some petals that are coming in the downward direction. I'm using this reference book just as a guide that will allow me to know more about the flowers, but I'm not really obsessed with getting every minor detail correct when I'm painting. So it's going to be slightly imperfect, and I think that's how you can make the flower your own. I dipped my small size round brush in the darker paint, and I just applied it on top of the petals again and allowed the colors to blend into each other. Now let's go back to the center and make some darker strokes. I'm just going to make it a bit darker in the center and along the sides. I just added a slight bit of brown into my primary red magenta to get a darker mix. Similarly, I'm going to make sure that the petals also have some layers of colors. So I'm going in and filling in some darker color. Okay, so that's how it looks so far. And then I've dipped my brush into green color. I've mixed a bit of green gold and sap green to make this organic looking green color. And using my size 6 round brush, I'm just going to draw a stem and a couple of leaves. To be able to draw free flowing strokes, make sure that your brush is moist at all times and it's not too dry. Just adding a beautiful green contrast. Okay, so that's about it for the first variety. We are definitely going to come back to it later to add more details. This next variety of echinacea is called Sombrero Adobe Orange. I know these words are very difficult to remember, but I'm trying my best to give you all the details if you want to look up for pictures on the internet. So this looks more like a fully open round flower, unlike the previous one in which the petals were drooping down in downward direction. So this is more like a front facing flower that we are trying to paint here. I started off with some brown color as the center of the flower. I stippled some dots in the center, and then I'm using my size 6 round brush to draw these basic petals which resemble shape of an eye. So I'm just going around the center and making these petals one by one. I'm making sure that some of the petals are light in color and some of the petals are dark, and of course in the end we are going to layer some darker petals on top of these. So once I finish painting all of the flowers, I'm going to come back to them when they dry, and we are going to add some really interesting details. So make sure you watch the end portion of this video to see how we enhance the flowers by adding really nice details to them. So far this is how the flower looks. I'm going to let everything dry, and in the meanwhile I'm going to draw a small stem using the same shade of green color that we mixed earlier, and I'm going to paint a couple of leaves on both the sides of the stem. The first coneflower has dried up a bit, so I'm really tempted to go back to it right away and add in some details. On the petals I'm making like really small thin strokes which look like veins on the petals using my small size round brush. So we are going to paint as we go some more details along the center. We are going to let all of this dry again and then add some more details in the end. The center seems to have dried a bit, so I'm going to go back with a darker mix of brown and layer it on top of the existing lighter brown. I'm just going to stipple some dots using my small size round brush and just build up some beautiful layers. The first layer of petals seem to have dried a bit, so I've mixed a slightly darker shade of primary red, magenta and orange, and I'm just building up some layers so that the flower does not look flat. And as you can see, it instantly lifts the mood of the flower and it starts to look a bit more realistic but yet organic and has got that imperfect feel to it. Okay, and then we are also going to go back to a darker mix of green color and layer it on top of the leaves again. Okay, let's move on to the next variety, which is called the double scoop cranberry, and it's slightly more pinkish in color compared to the first two varieties that we painted. So I have mixed some primary red magenta onto my palette. I'm not going to use opera pink because I don't have it on my palette at the moment, but I'm just going to make my primary red magenta work for me somehow. So you don't necessarily need to have the exact shades in your palette, but you can just mix and match and try to get as close as possible to the shade that you're aiming for. So similar to the first variety, I started off with the center by stippling some dots and making a rough oval shape, and then I switched to my size 6 round brush and drew some petals. Now I'm painting this flower slightly at an angle facing towards the left side, and I drew about 7 to 8 petals. I'm letting them dry, and in the meanwhile I'm drawing a stem with some leaves, just the same way we did for the earlier two flowers. Again, I'm going to come back to this flower as well to add in the details. I'm going to darken the center a bit using my small size round brush, and I'm also going to add a bit of darker shade near the petals just to differentiate between the center and the petals of the flower and make it a bit more layered. So this is how the third variety looks. It's pretty straightforward and simple, very similar to the first variety that we painted. Now let's paint the last Echinacea variety, the usual violet and purple one that we see in gardens and parks. This is the most common cone flower that I have personally seen. So I'm going to show you how to paint that as well. For this one, the center of the flower is brown with a mix of yellow ochre. So I'm starting off by stippling some dots in the center. And once that is done, I'm mixing a beautiful shade of violet onto my palette. And then I'm going to draw some petals that are coming in the downward direction. Now the purple or the violet varieties are slightly more bigger in my opinion, and they also have more droopy petals. So I'm just trying to imagine this coneflower in my head. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of this variety in the reference book that I'm using today, but because I've seen this flower so many times before, I just thought of painting it here and show you that variety as well. So I just drew some petals that are drooping down and went in and added some darker mix to show some color variation. Then going back again to fill in a darker brown around the center, just so that it looks a bit more dimensional. And then of course we are going to add a small stem to the flower and a couple of leaves. So that's pretty much about Echinacea, or coneflowers as we call them more commonly. And I hope you were able to paint along with me and give it a go, especially the varieties that are not so commonly seen, or at least the ones that I have not seen so often. And now I'm simply going to add all the details. I'm just going back and darkening the petals a bit, blending the colors with my small size round brush. And like I said, I'm also going to go back to all the flowers one by one to get some details in place. So this is our purple variety. Now let's go back to the second one and see how we can enhance it. I'm just darkening some of the petals and then also adding the darker ones. I think it instantly lifts the mood of the flower, and I'm so glad I went back to add all of these details. I'm also going to add slight yellow details to the center to show the stamens. So I just mixed a bit of Indian yellow onto my palette and then adding some veins on the leaves to bring out some texture. adding a darker mix of brown again. Going back to the first coneflower and layering it again with some darker shade in the center. I really like the way it instantly pops out. Okay, let's look at the third variety and see how we can add details there. Using a darker mix, I'm just layering the center portion again. And I think I'm also going to add some darker petals now. I'm just going to layer them on the top just to show some new petals that are emerging from the flower that are still small. I think these small details really make a difference. Now let's see what we can do to the last one. I think I'm going to add some veins to the petals just so that there is some texture and the petals don't look flat. Make sure you're doing all these details with a very light hand. Don't press your brush too much when you're working with details. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done here. A few more details near the center with a darker mix of brown. Let's add some veins to the leaves. And that's it. I really hope you had fun painting these Echinacea varieties with me today. Do subscribe to my channel and click on the bell icon so you will get notified when I post new tutorials. Thank you and happy painting.